Southern Ohio's rural counties, with their rocky and wide-open spaces, are perfect for outdoor recreation. Coal miners, factory workers, and farmers make up most of the population, and many take advantage of the streams and forests during hunting and fishing seasons. These counties were at one time a place where residents would leave their doors unlocked at night, and violent crime was considered a problem of big cities. But all that began to change in the spring of 1989. On November the 10th, 1990, 21-year-old Jamie Paxton, a steelworker, awoke just before dawn. It was a frosty Saturday morning, but Jamie had plans outdoors. Ohio's annual bow hunting season was in full swing, and he was not going to miss the opportunity to bag a deer. Jamie lived with his parents in a cozy white-frame house in Bannock, Ohio. Following breakfast, just before 7 o'clock, the handsome young man, nearly 6 feet tall with blue-green eyes and dark brown hair, headed out the door with his crossbow. Jamie's mother, 49-year-old Jean Paxton, had expected her son home by mid-afternoon. When he failed to show, she assumed he had a successful hunt and would pull up the drive any minute with a buck in his trunk. At 2:40 p.m., as Jean went about her household chores, she looked out the window and saw a sheriff's car pull up. She dashed onto the porch where her husband Mickey was clutching a post for support. "Don't tell me," she screamed. "Don't even tell me. Jamie's dead." Her son had been found by friends on a brushy hillside along Route 9, dead from apparent rifle bullet wounds to his chest, right knee, and buttocks. The killing of Jamie Paxton horrified the quiet community. Hunting accidents were not uncommon in southern Ohio, but Sheriff Tom McCourt knew that this was no accident. When we saw more than one wound, we knew it could not be an accident. Plus, it was a bullet wound rather than an arrow, and the gun season was not in yet, Sheriff McCourt explained. The killer had left no clues behind. Investigators checked the area for spent cartridges, tire tracks, footprints, anything that might shed some light on the killer's identity. Sheriff McCourt said that his deputies also checked the area around the body, looking for the spent projectiles that had passed through the body. Investigators were bewildered by the senseless killing, and after interviewing and polygraphing friends, family members, and acquaintances, they were even more baffled. Everyone in the area knew Jamie Paxton. No one that we knew of, or even to this day, had ever disliked the young man, said McCourt. Jean Paxton decided that mourning Jamie was not enough. She wanted to know who had killed him and why. Jean Paxton used the only method at her disposal to try to get the answers she and her husband so desperately sought. A short time after Jamie's murder, Jean began a letter-writing campaign, sending letters to the killer via the Martin's Ferry Times Leader newspaper. "To the murderer of my son, Jamie, would it be easier for you if I wrote words of hate? I can't because I don't feel hate. I feel deep sorrow at losing my son. You took a light from my life on November 10th and left me with many days of darkness. Have you thought of your own death? Unless you confess your sin and ask for God's forgiveness, you'll face the fire and fury of hell. When you're caught, I'll be sorry for your family. They will have to carry the burden of your guilt all their lives." Investigators had told Jean that the killer was probably ruthless and would not be moved by her pleas. But she persisted. "It's been nearly a year since you killed my son," she wrote in October 1991. "Has your life changed in the past 11 months? Our family hasn't lived since last November 10th. We're surviving one day at a time. There's one question on our minds all day long, and every time we wake up at night, we want to know why Jamie was killed." Jean's work finally paid off. The killer sent an anonymous, typed letter addressed to the Times Leader, Sheriff McCourt, and the Paxtons. After providing previously undisclosed details of the murder scene, he explained himself. "I am the murderer of Jamie Paxton. Jamie Paxton was a complete stranger to me. I never saw him before in my life, and he never said a word to me that Saturday. Paxton was killed because of an irresistible compulsion that has taken over my life. I knew when I left my house that day that someone would die by my hand. I just didn't know who or where. Technically, I meet the definition of a serial killer, but I'm an average-looking person with a family, job, and home just like yourself. Something in my head causes me to turn into a merciless killer with no conscience. To the Paxtons, you deserve to know the details. I was very drunk and a voice inside my head said, "Do it." I stopped my car behind Jamie's and got out. Jamie started walking very slowly down the hill toward the road. He appeared to be looking past me at something in the distance. I raised my rifle to my shoulder and lined him up in the sights. It took at least 5 seconds to take careful aim. My first shot was off a little bit and hit him in the right chest. He groaned and went down. I wanted to make sure he was finished, so I fired a second shot aimed halfway between his hip and shoulder. He was crawling around on the ground. I jerked the shot and hit him in the knee. He raised his head and groaned again. My third shot also missed him and hit him in the butt. He never moved again. 5 minutes after I shot Paxton, I was drinking a beer and had blocked out all thoughts of what I had just done out of my mind. I thought no more of shooting Paxton than shooting a bottle at the dump. I know you hate my guts, and rightfully so. I think about Jamie every hour of the day, as I'm sure you do. Don't feel bad about not solving this case. You could interview till doomsday everyone that Jamie Paxton had ever met in his life, and you wouldn't have a clue to my identity. With no motive, no weapon, and no witnesses, you could not possibly solve this crime. The letter was signed, "The Murderer of Jamie Paxton." The Belmont County Sheriff's Office now had its first lead. Jean Paxton's love for her son and her antipathy for his killer had exposed a serial killer the authorities had no idea even existed, and when he struck again, the pieces began to fall into place. On Saturday, the 14th of March, 1992, 49-year-old Claude Hawkins decided to do some early morning fishing after finishing up his midnight shift at Pittsburgh Plate and Glass Company. Married and the father of 4, Hawkins loved fishing and had a favorite spot just below Wills Creek Dam, northwest of Belmont, Ohio, in Coshocton County. He was found dead a short while later, shot in the back at close range. Since the Hawkins murder occurred on federal land, the FBI was called in. Special Agent Harry Trumbitis from the Columbus Field Office was one of the officers assigned to the case. Usually you'd find some type of shell casing in the area. I remember looking very hard, metal detectors, hands and knees, for any shell casings and that. None were ever found. And so that was something that if in fact we had somebody who was evidence conscious enough to pick up the shell casing after they shot and killed somebody, we were dealing with a different brand of person here. The FBI was convinced that Hawkins' murder was not a solitary event. On March 26, 1992, in New Philadelphia, just south of Canton, officers from 4 counties, the Ohio Division of Wildlife, and the FBI gathered to compare notes. As the meeting progressed, the assembled officers discovered that the earliest of possible related homicides occurred on April 1, 1989. At about 9:30 a.m., on a back road in Tuscarawas County, about 100 miles north of Belmont City, 35-year-old truck driver Donald Welling had been out jogging near his home when someone put a .30 caliber rifle bullet through his heart from approximately 10 feet away. At the same time, local authorities could not find a motive or any evidence to help them solve the murder. Jamie Paxton's murder was also brought up, and a link seemed apparent. Investigators concluded that the killer had been inactive for 19 months before Paxton's murder in Belmont. They also discovered that 18 days after Jamie's murder, on November 28, 1990, there had been another murder in Duxbury, Massachusetts. Resident Kevin Loring, a 30-year-old refrigerator technician who was married and the father of 3 children, had been murdered by a single gunshot wound to the face. He'd been hunting deer in a strip mine area in Muskingum County and south of Coshocton County. The murder of Loring had been deemed a hunting accident, but there was little question now as to what had actually happened. It didn't take long for investigators to realize that a serial killer was roaming the back roads of southern Ohio. On the morning of April 5, 1992, 10 days after the New Philadelphia meeting, another outdoorsman was found dead. Gary Bradley, a 44-year-old steelworker with a wife and 3 children from Williamstown, West Virginia, had been shot in the back while fishing in Noble County, adjacent to Belmont County. The serial killer had apparently struck again. In early May, a secret 5-county federal and local investigative task force was established. The group met at the FBI field office in Columbus, where officers from each of the 5 counties presented details of their cases. The so-called Hannibal Lecter Squad, a group of 3 personality profilers from the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit in Quantico, Virginia, formed a profile of the killer, concluding that he was a white male over 30, a gun enthusiast, avid hunter, and owned at least several weapons. The killer would have above-average intelligence but was introverted and without many friends, and would resolve personal problems in a cowardly fashion. He might have a drinking problem and engage in obscene telephone calls, arson fire, and vandalism by shooting out windows or tires of vehicles. He likely would take sadistic delight in mutilating and killing animals of all sorts. Stressful events would trigger his criminal episodes, which usually would be committed while he was drunk. The killer, the profile said, lived within easy driving distance of the slayings. Whoever killed the outdoorsman did it for his own satisfaction and pleasure, said Dr. Emmanuel Tenay, a professor of psychiatry at Wayne State University in Detroit. If it's pleasurable to kill dogs and cats at random, the much better prey is humans. They're a bigger trophy. People enjoy killing. Let's face it, that's why they do it. By midsummer, the task force had investigated and ruled out at least 100 possible suspects, but they were not much closer to finding the killer. On July 30th, 1992, which would have been Jamie's 23rd birthday, Jean Paxton sent another letter to the paper. She described how she had baked her son's favorite cake that day, but Jamie wasn't there to enjoy it. There's a small child in our family whose biggest worry was who's going to blow out the candles on Jamie's cake. The next time there's a birthday party in your family, I hope you think of the cake on our table and know you're the reason Jamie wasn't there to blow out the candles. In August, investigators concluded that the killer was not going to risk sending in another letter himself and decided to go public. In a press release to the media, they explained that they suspected a serial killer was hunting outdoorsmen in a loose cluster of eastern Ohio counties. The headline of the Saturday, August 22nd edition of the Plain Dealer read, "Slayings linked in rural Ohio." The article stated that 5 sportsmen had been murdered, and investigators suspected a single serial sniper in their deaths. The paper also included a copy of the FBI's suspect profile. On August 26, 1992, Tuscarawas County Sheriff's Detective Sergeant Walter Wilson got a call from 43-year-old Richard Fry. Apparently, Fry had read the August 11, 1992 report in the newspaper. "I'd like to meet with you," Fry told Detective Wilson. "I saw the reports about the task force that had been formed to solve the killings, and I just think I got a guy who should be investigated as a possible suspect." The man was nervous about coming into the station, so Detective Wilson agreed to meet him at a private location outside of town later that day. During their meeting, Fry explained to Wilson that the profile sounded a lot like an old high school buddy of his, Tom Dillon, an employee of the Canton Water Department. In the 1970s, Fry said, he and Dillon often drove around eastern Ohio together, drinking beer, shooting road signs, and committing minor acts of arson. Fry recounted his conversation to David Knox and 2 other Akron Beacon Journal reporters. "Back in the year we graduated, we were having a problem with some other kids at high school. One of these standoffs, you throw something at my car, I throw something at your car. But nobody ever throws a punch. One night, one of the other guys kicked his car. Tom pulled out his gun and took a shot at the guy. I asked him this, 'Did you really mean to hit him?' And he said, 'Yes, I meant to hit him.' I used to go out hunting with him because we were gun enthusiasts. In the beginning, it was all pretty legitimate, but then we started hitting these dumps in southern Stark County. We'd go down there hunting rats and things. I remember we ran into a couple of scraggly dogs one time. They were all diseased. They were sick. I remember they had open sores. Tom said, 'Do you think I ought to kill them?' And I said, 'Well, you'd probably be doing them a favor.' I remember him shooting them. I didn't think too much about it. Wild dogs can be vicious. Then he started shooting dogs, just dogs along the road. I said, 'Tom, shooting a wild dog is one thing, but that dog doesn't look very wild to me.' He said, 'You can't let them damn things be running around.' I let it go by once or twice, but then I said, 'Tom, you gotta quit it, or I won't go out with you. Those are somebody's pets. Somebody loves them. It's just not right to do that.' We used to discuss serial killers too," Fry added, "especially Ted Bundy. Tom was fascinated by Bundy. In time, Fry said, Dillon became more sadistic. Once while driving back from Atwood Lake in Carroll County, Tom pulled off the side of the road and pulled out this gun and started shooting at this farmer. Apparently, the farmer was a good way off, 200-300 yards. One of the others in the car protested, 'What the hell are you doing?' Dillon explained that he couldn't hit a target at that distance with a pistol, so I'm just plinking at him, Fry said. I just didn't have anything more to do with him. In fact, if I'd see him someplace, I didn't even wave to him or talk with him. I ran into Dillon again in Newcomerstown, in southern Tuscarawas County, in about 1986. This was the first I'd spoken to him in a long time. I said, "What in the world are you doing clear down here?" He said, "Oh, just driving around, this and that." When I saw him in Newcomerstown, I thought, he's moving farther south because he's still up to his old ways. They moved the Ohio Gun Collectors Association gun show up to Cleveland, and I wasn't a member, so Dillon invited me to be his guest. He said he had stopped killing animals, so I said, "I guess we can be friends again." I remember one time, he and I were driving and he said, "Do you realize you can go out into the country and find somebody and there are no witnesses? You can shoot them. There's no motive. Do you realize how easy murder would be to get away with?" I said, "Yeah, but why would you do it?" On a trip to a gun show last summer, we were talking about Ted Bundy and how can a guy get away with all that. Tom said, "Do you think I've ever killed somebody?" The question really caught me off guard. I said, "No, I don't think so." And he said, "That just proves you don't know me very well." The way he said that to me was really scary. I've never seen him like that before. I thought to myself, has anybody been shot? Fry went on to say that Dillon lived with his family in Magnolia, about 75 miles from where Jamie Paxton was murdered. It did not take long for them to find ample evidence to support Fry's claims about Thomas Dillon's penchant for animal killings and vandalism. On September 20th, 1992, a witness saw a red Toyota pickup truck, similar to Dillon's, near a spot where a dog had been killed in Tuscarawas County. A .25 caliber slug was removed from the animal's body. Fry confirmed that Dillon owned a .25 caliber rifle and, at Detective Wilson's request, bought it from Dillon. Days later, a ballistic match was made. When Wilson ran a check on Dillon's history of firearms purchases, he learned that Dillon had bought numerous weapons from a licensed federal firearms dealer. The dealer's records showed that Dillon had bought 18 weapons in the last few years, including 2 Mausers of the kind used to kill 4 of the 5 outdoorsmen. Detective Wilson dug deeper into Dillon's past, beginning with his employment records. Except for a trivial disciplinary action for absenteeism in the 1970s, Dillon's 22-year work record was good, but his criminal record was more interesting. In 1969, while a student at Ohio State University, Dillon had been investigated for possessing a Russian mortar military weapon. Authorities did not press charges, citing that the mortar was more of a collector's item than a weapon. A second, more recent and illuminating incident had occurred in August 1991. Dillon had been cited by a game warden for illegal target practice near a state hunting area in southern Stark County. In search of his pickup truck, the warden seized a .22 caliber pistol with a silencer. Dillon later pleaded guilty to possessing an illegal silencer and was released on bond on the condition that he does not possess any firearms. He was awaiting final sentencing. The more the task force dug into Dillon's past, the more likely a suspect he became. The task force began tailing Dillon from the air and on the ground in mid-October 1992. During their surveillance, officers followed Dillon on weekend jaunts of 75 to 125 miles over country roads in Belmont, Harrison, Tuscarawas, Holmes, Coshocton, and Carroll counties. Dillon often stopped for a beer and would sometimes begin drinking as early as 7:15 a.m. On November 8, 1992, investigators got to witness an example of Dillon's vandalism firsthand. He went on a shooting spree, targeting electric meters, oil well pumps, and stop signs. Dillon also stopped next to a car with a for sale sign on it, picked up a large rock, and threw it through the windshield. Task force members lost Dillon on his way home from Belmont County on November 11, 1992. But later that day, investigators discovered that numerous cows had been killed with a crossbow in Tuscarawas County. Authorities had been informed that Dillon sometimes used a crossbow. Richard Fry helped obtain several of Dillon's arrows, and they were the same model and style as those recovered from the dead cows. Authorities followed Dillon to a gun show in New Philadelphia on November 21, 1992, where he bought a .22 caliber rifle. The purchase of the gun was enough to arrest Dillon for violating his bond on the silencer charge, but there was still nothing to link him to the killings of the outdoorsmen. Investigators faced a tough decision. By waiting to arrest him, they risked losing him and giving him the chance to kill again. Ohio's deer season would open November 30, 1992, drawing more than 300,000 hunters into the woods. Authorities decided not to take the gamble. They arrested Dillon outside a Tuscarawas County convenience store on November 27, 1992, hoping that a search of his home would reveal other damning evidence. Unfortunately, searches of Dillon's house, Toyota pickup truck, camper, office, and safe deposit box turned up nothing. 5 days later, at his bond hearing, prosecutors revealed that Dillon was the prime suspect in 5 killings. The barrage of publicity that followed Dillon's arrest finally gave the task force the break they needed. On December 4, 1992, a Stark County man came forward and told investigators that he had bought a 6.5 by 55 mm Swedish Mauser rifle from Dillon at a Massilian gun show on April 6th. The man turned the rifle and a receipt over to investigators. Ballistic tests matched the bullets recovered from Gary Bradley and Claude Hawkins with the rifle. On January 22, 1993, a Noble County grand jury indicted Dillon on 2 counts of aggravated murder with death penalty specifications, and his bond was set at $1 million. Noble County prosecutor Lucian Young wanted to seek indictments in all 5 slayings, but because of publicity about Dillon, he went ahead with 2, planning to file other charges later. Officials at the Stark County Jail placed Dillon on homicide watch after 2 strips of a blanket were found in his cell. One of the strips had reportedly been fashioned into a noose. Dillon claimed the strips were used to cover his eyes while he slept. Shortly after that incident, Dillon told a mental health counselor that he would strangle inmates if he had the chance, and he wouldn't shed a tear. Thomas Lee Dillon was born in Canton, Ohio on July 9, 1950. His father succumbed to Hodgkin's disease and died when Dillon was just 15 months old. Psychologist Jeffrey Smalden said that Dillon viewed his mother as a cold woman who never praised or punished him. Dillon has no memories of his mother ever hugging him, kissing him, or telling him she loved him, he said. Classmates from Glenwood High School in Plain Township remembered Dillon as extremely intelligent, but a loner. His 1968 senior yearbook lists no extracurricular activities. Tom was removed from the group, said classmate Ronald Skelton. He was a person who marched to the beat of a different drummer, separated from the mainstream. Another classmate, Thomas Bright, said that Dillon was quiet, especially in a group. I always liked him, Bright said. I got a kick out of him. He made me laugh. Dillon loved to hunt. He simply liked to kill and enjoyed watching animals suffer. As a teenager, Dillon began keeping count of the animals he killed on a calendar in his bedroom of his home on 37th Street Northwest in Canton. He also kept a separate calendar listing all the girls he'd had sex with. Following high school, Dillon attended Kent State University's Stark campus and later Ohio State University. In the summer months, we'd all hang out at Willow Springs swimming pool on 55th Street, said a man who remembers Dillon. I just ran around with him a couple of years. We all drank together. I never saw him shoot a gun, but I heard other people talking about him. Crazy Dillon went out drinking and he was shooting a pistol out the window, or he shot the windows out of a school. I heard things like that a couple of times. Dillon graduated from Ohio State in 1972 and went to work as a draftsman for the Canton Water Department. In 1978, he married Catherine Elsass, a nurse from Alliance, Ohio. By the early 1980s, Dillon began boasting to friends that the count on his death calendar had reached 500. He had also attended Ohio Peace Officers Training in Lawrence Township in Stark County, where he graduated with expert marksmanship. In the mid-1980s, several of Dillon's neighbors complained to police because Dillon was killing their dogs. Dillon was a bad hunter, said a man who hunted with Dillon for several years. He would shoot at farmers' cats after getting permission to hunt on their land. He just didn't care. He often boasted of killing a deer caught in high water while crossing a river. He brought the deer home without field dressing it. He gutted the carcass in his yard and made a mess of it, the hunter said. Dillon didn't seem to understand the concept of friendship. He never offered to do a favor or asked for one. It was always a trade, he said. I'll do this if you do that. He never talked about women. He never mentioned his wife and love in the same sentence, he said. He was always changing guns and carried weapons even when he rode a bike. The hunter estimated that Dillon fired approximately 1,000 rounds a year in target practice. Dillon shot so often that he had permanently damaged his hearing. He seemed to get a physical thrill out of killing, the hunter said. He once used a knife to finish off a wounded groundhog. He was shaking. He was in a frenzy, wild-eyed. Dillon's family members were shocked by his arrest. His mother-in-law, Anne Elsass, a retired high school teacher and guidance counselor, refused to believe that her son-in-law was capable of murder. "Dillon is a witty, kind man who has always had a yen for guns," she said. Even though she refused to believe initial allegations against him, she told the Akron Beacon-Journal, "If they're true, they're true." Elsass said her daughter Catherine worked as a nurse at Timken Mercy Medical Center in Canton and would rely on her faith in God to get her through the ordeal. "My stomach is churning," she confided. "I have to keep my spirits up for Kathy. Maybe part of me wants to deny this. Tom was always pleasant. He was always joking. He seemed like a son to me. We were a very close-knit family," she said. On February the 9th, 1993, 100 spectators gathered outside the Noble County Courthouse as Dillon, handcuffed and in shackles, was escorted inside. The proceeding was short, and Dillon pleaded not guilty to murder charges in the deaths of Gary Bradley and Claude Hawkins. A third murder charge was filed against Dillon on May 22, 1993. He was charged with aggravated murder in the death of Jamie Paxton. "This is what we've been waiting for the last 2.5 years, said Jean Paxton. "It looks like the end's in sight." Just 4 days after being charged with Paxton's murder, Dillon was sentenced to 3 years and 10 months in prison, the maximum, on the unrelated federal firearm charges. Before he could be tried for the 3 capital murders, Dillon placed a call from jail to a WTOV television reporter on July 3, 1993, and confessed to the murders. A similar call had also been placed to an Akron Beacon-Journal reporter. "I have major problems. I'm crazy. I want to kill. I want to kill," he said. The following day, Dillon's attorneys put together a plea bargain in which Dillon would confess to all 3 murders on the guarantee that he would not receive the death penalty and that no further charges would be brought against him. On July 12, 1993, Thomas Dillon entered his pleas before Judge John Now in Noble County Common Pleas Court. He showed no emotion as he answered "guilty" to each charge. Under the plea agreement, Now sentenced Dillon to life in prison with no chance of parole for 165 years, the maximum sentence. Paxton's mother, Jean, said she was relieved the case was over. "Today is the beginning of the end for Thomas Dillon," she said. Nonetheless, she was upset that Dillon showed no remorse. "We were given a life sentence the day he decided to kill our son," she said. "I think he's a pathetic coward. He's taken the coward's way out of everything." Noble County prosecutor Lucian Young III said the plea agreement was the most practical solution, even though he preferred a sentence of death. "I kind of felt like he ought to die," he said. Dillon's lawyer, Roger Seinenberg, countered claims that Dillon felt no remorse. "He has some regrets about this, but he's also got to put it all behind him," he said. At 7 o'clock the next night after the sentencing, the Paxtons' telephone rang. It was Thomas Dillon. He told Jean Paxton that her pathetic coward comment had hurt him. "That's what you are, Thomas," she replied, "and if you start with your cocky attitude, I will hang up. I've had enough of that for the past several months. I'm not interested in what you have to say. But there are things I want you to know. Thomas, have you ever heard the expression, 'Tears are the safety valve of the heart'?" He had not, so she talked about repentance and prayer. "Quit your profanity, stop the loopy simpering in front of the cameras, and pick up the Bible before it's too late," she said. Paxton continued speaking to him for an hour, finally concluding, "We've spoken long enough. I can't hate you, but I can never forgive you for what you've done to our lives." In July 1993, Dillon admitted to setting 160 fires and committing other acts of vandalism in eastern Ohio during the preceding 5 years. Noble County Sheriff Landon Smith estimated that Dillon's fires caused more than $2 million in damages. The fires were set in Coshocton, Belmont, Guernsey, Carroll, Columbiana, and Tuscarawas counties. Dillon pleaded with authorities not to be sent to Ohio's toughest facility, the maximum security prison in Lucasville, in November 1993. "If I go to Lucasville, I'm a dead man," Dillon said. When news of this comment reached Jean Paxton, she collected 8,000 names on a petition. Dillon was sent to Lucasville. On October 21, 2011, Dillon died in the prison wing at Corrections Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, at the age of 61. He died of cancer after 3 painful weeks in the hospital.